Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Walsh. I'm here with Frac Action, the director and founder. We're here today because currently New York State is reviewing the 401 water quality certificate for the Constitution pipeline. We're reviewing the impacts that this pipeline will have on over 1,800 acres of farmland and forests across New York State. Over 250 waterways on a pipeline stretch that is over 100 miles here in New York State. We're also here because 33 days ago, FERC approved the tree cutting in Pennsylvania along the Constitution pipeline route, the 25-mile pipeline route in Pennsylvania for this same pipeline, without all the permits having been issued here in New York. At that same time, FERC said that the companies asked that they be allowed to cut down trees in New York State. We estimate about 700,000 trees. They were denied that request, but they were allowed to proceed in Pennsylvania along the same pipeline route, which has not been approved. During that time, there was a family that many people in our movement came to know and actually visit their property, the Halloran and Zephyr family, who operate a property and own a property for 70 years in Susquehanna County. For 7 years, they've owned a maple syrup business, and this is some of the maple syrup from the trees there. They had their land seized by eminent domain, and for many weeks, there was a sustained protest to keep the pipeline company from cutting down the trees that are literally the lifeblood of their business. Then the Constitution Pipeline Company took them to federal court and charged them, had charges against them, which we'll speak about, and also were demanding that they be given the right to proceed in tree cutting. The court dismissed the charges against them, but allowed them the company to start cutting the trees and authorized federal marshals to come in and enforce that, which you see right here. We've got U.S. Marshals who are armed with AK-47s and very much a militarized state there currently that's happening at the Halloran's private property. Just recently, the Constitution Pipeline Company came back to New York, came back to FERC, and demanded that the pipeline route, that they be allowed to clear the pipeline route here again in New York. And they demanded to FERC that they know by today, because there is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife deadline on when you can cut trees because of habitat on March 31st. Just on Monday, the Attorney General of New York State, Eric Schneiderman, again weighed in and said no to FERC, that they should not allow the Constitution Pipeline to allow this company to cut down over 100 miles worth of trees in New York State because we still have outstanding permits. This project is not approved. So we are here today with the families to hear from them, with folks that live along the pipeline corridor in New York, to deliver a letter that was signed by over 80 organizations asking Governor Cuomo and acting DEC Commissioner Basil Segos to make them aware of the situation that we're facing, and to say that we really need them to take a stand and reject the 401 water quality certificate. We believe that they have justification for this over the many years in which the pipeline company has ignored any requests to protect and preserve natural resources along that corridor. The DEC literally asked them to move the pipeline into an existing pipeline corridor, so they wouldn't have to cut down and disrupt so many trees and wildlife, vegetation, and water. And they denied every single attempt. This is something that we've come to know from the gas and oil industry and their arrogance and not listening to states' rights or human rights. So we're gonna have a couple of speakers and then take some questions. We have Megan Halloran and Marianne Zephyr here to talk about the situation that they faced for the past 33 days on their property, the extreme heartache that they've experienced, and just yesterday watching the trees over 3 acres be clear cut while U.S. Marshals stood armed to the teeth to protect those crews. So we'll hear a bit from them. Megan and Marianne.
I'm Megan Halloran. This is my aunt, Marianne Zephyr. In 2012, Constitution approached my family about putting a pipeline through our property, and we said no. And that should have been the end. And instead, they're currently cutting the trees yesterday and probably tomorrow on our property that we have continued for 5 years to say no. The pipeline corridor that was proposed was non-negotiable, no matter what they say. We proposed all sorts of alternative routes to go around us, to make it less impactful on our land, to find a way that we could work together. And instead, they're clearing 3 acres. They're clearing 90% of the forest on the property. They're clearing her backyard in the house that my grandparents lived in, my mother was raised in, and that my aunt still lives in today. They're clearing the forest of her home as we speak. We've been out there for 33 days anticipating this and making very reasonable requests. Wait till you're certain you can build the pipeline. And we don't want this at all. We've said no from the beginning. Why are you cutting our trees down right now? Irreparable damage to the property that might not even be necessary. They came to the property to try and cut trees, and I went out and spoke with the representative and asked him to wait. He called in the state police, who discussed the situation with me, decided they couldn't do anything on the property that day or that they wouldn't take any action. They spoke with the Williams representative again, and he chose to leave. A week later, we were called into court for contempt charges leveled against us for violating a court order and preventing them from accessing the land, which was not true. The judge dismissed the charges, but gave Constitution the right to use federal marshals to enforce the order to build their pipeline. Yesterday morning, they showed up at her home with half a dozen armed federal marshals with assault weapons and bulletproof vests to enforce their right to clear trees on our land without our permission and arm themselves against the peaceful protesters who had done nothing but speak to them with respect and try to give them maple candy, which they weren't allowed to take. Today they're cutting our trees. Tomorrow they'll be cutting our trees. And if anyone thinks that these people are willing to play by the rules, and when they say we need these certificates, we need this water quality certificate, we'll do everything you tell us to. We'll build this pipeline right. We'll be fair. I think that these pictures are a pretty good demonstration that that's not the case, and that these people are not willing to deal with landowners fairly. They're not willing to deal with the government fairly, and they're not willing to follow the rules. We're losing 90% of our maple business on that property. Right now, my father's out collecting sap at 10% of what we would normally be producing there, because they have to cut these trees right now for a pipeline that would never be built. And that doesn't get factored into any of these equations by the people from Constitution and Williams. And we don't get treated fairly. And I think that's something that New York should take as a strong warning. See the example that they've given us and wait till they show up in your backyard with assault weapons, with the school buses driving by, with my neighbors driving by wondering what we could possibly have done to bring the military to our property so that they can help cut down the trees.
That's our tax dollars at work. Also, the New Yorkers, they're saying it's an emergency that they have to come through before March 31st and clear New York also. And they haven't even finished clearing the people around us who signed up. They haven't cut half of what they need to on their 20 miles in PA. So it is not an emergency. Please vote no, Governor, please.
Thank you so much, Megan and Marianne. Next, we have Trellin Smith, who's here with the group People Not Pipelines, who is also here representing a number of maple syrup businesses to deliver both a letter, a separate letter from these maple syrup businesses, as well as some maple syrup to the governor today. And she's representing them because right now they're out tapping the trees.
It's a big industry in this state, and it's imperiled by, first in the short term, by the clear cutting of trees, 100 miles of trees, over 700,000 along the entire pipeline route that would be permanently taken out of production. And in the long term, the impact to the maple syrup business comes from the fact that this pipeline will exacerbate climate change. We hear a lot about natural gas being a bridge fuel, being a clean fuel. It is not. It's been determined to be worse than coal with its greenhouse gas footprint when the extraction, transportation, and burning are all taken into account. And this pipeline would bring more industry, it would bring more infrastructure, it would bring power plants and compressor stations, all of which would also take out of production. And we are calling on, I'm delivering to Governor Cuomo from maple syrup producers in this state that are asking him to protect their livelihood and the livelihood of future generations, and champion what it is we have in this state that's worth saving. Yeah, that's all.
Great. Next up, we have a New Yorker who traveled and made his way a few times down to the Halloran property to be a part of the protest down there to make sure that the land was not cleared. He's also an award-winning actor, and we're very happy to have him here today, James Cromwell.
My wife and I traveled down to the Hallorans twice to be part of the protest to stop the clear cutting of their land and their maple trees. You can't understand what it's like to be there unless you're there. You can stand in this room and hear us speak, but until you see it with your own eyes, you have no feeling about it. I don't think this is happening to anybody who works for this pipeline. This is happening to people who have spent their life farming some of the most beautiful land in this country. And what is happening in Pennsylvania is going to come to New York. We are lucky in this state that we have a ban against fracking. Because if we didn't, our communities would look exactly like Dimmock. And that's what we don't want in New York. The governor was great to support the ban on fracking, but it didn't go far enough. So now here we are again, trying to oppose the Constitution pipeline, which the governor can do something about. We are trying to oppose the lateral pipeline, which brings gas from the Millennium Pipeline to the CPV plant in Minisink, in Wawayanda. That is also something he can do something about. We're asking the governor to step up to the plate, to be an environmental hero. This is part of a larger policy in this country of hydrofracking infrastructure, the use of what is euphemistically called natural gas, which is nothing like your grandfather's gas, which is dangerous for the environment and for people, and we have to stop this. So we are asking the governor, please, do not grant this certificate. Do not grant the water permit for the lateral pipeline, and stop all hydrofracking infrastructure in the state of New York now. It's going to happen sooner or later. The president made promises in Paris that we would reduce our greenhouse gases. We now are at 50% non-renewables in this state. If we continue to build these plants, if we continue to put in these pipelines, we'll be way over that. Who is going to suffer? Our children and their children's children until life is untenable on this planet. So we're asking the governor to think in the broad term and do something that nobody else is doing. Keep it in the ground, stop these pipelines, stop fracking in every state. Let's do it now. Thank you.
And next up, we have Don Hebert. He's from Compressor Free Franklin, which is a town in which the Constitution Pipeline is slated to propose the proposed route.
Good afternoon. Yes, Franklin is a little town down in Delaware County, just over the hill from Oneonta, and we're slated to have it come right through our town within a mile of the center of town. And I'm here today because this current issue is in Pennsylvania. That's where it's happening. That's where it unfortunately shouldn't be happening. They should not be doing, I mean, tree cutting is construction. I don't care how in the heck you frame it. Tree cutting is construction. And without all the permits, construction should not happen. Pennsylvania has 25 miles. New York State has 100 miles. So we can see it. It's not going to stop at the border. They're going to try to bully their way in. They just did it with a second request to have a notice to proceed, which the Attorney General did turn down again, or at least express their displeasure that it can happen. So we're here to encourage the governor, encourage the DEC, encourage the Attorney General to keep, hold the line. Don't give this water quality permit. Don't allow a notice to proceed to go farther. Once a tree is cut, you can't take it back. And a 100-foot swath for 125 miles is not a pretty sight. So we heartfully ask the governor to, continue as the good works that he's done so far with the things that he has stopped, and recently the other pipeline, the AIM, I believe it was pipeline, and stop this pipeline. It's not needed. It's not serving New Yorkers. It's going to be exportation gas by way of the Iroquois pipeline. So there's no need. Don't do it. Governor, Attorney General, and DEC Commissioner, please, hear our pleas. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And lastly, we'll be launching a campaign, a social media and public awareness campaign called Stop FERC. Just a few days ago, the governor basically told FERC that they should halt construction on the Algonquin incremental pipeline because of the risk that it could potentially pose to Indian Point. We find this a nation-setting precedent, and we're grateful for that. While the state conducts its own independent risk assessment, that situation, as well as the situation down in Pennsylvania where FERC allowed the Constitution Pipeline Company to clear trees along a 25-mile stretch without the pipeline even being approved, really goes to show how reckless and working for the industry this commission, this agency is in the federal government. And so I think with that, we will open up for questions.
Julia, where are we right now? You said they want to by March 2nd. What's going to happen next?
Well, FERC will be issuing a ruling or a statement responding to the Constitution and Pipeline Company's request to begin tree cutting here in New York State, and we'll have to see what they say. We are hopeful that the DEC will reject the 401 water quality permit and put this pipeline issue to bed.
Can you talk to the DEC at all? Do you know what the status is on this?
No, we haven't spoke to the DEC, but from the past many months, they're reviewing the permit, reviewing how it will impact the waterways, farmlands, and agricultural areas, and we're hopeful that they'll reject the permit.
Called FERC reckless, working on behalf of the fossil fuel industry to undermine states' rights. You clearly have lost confidence in them.
Yes, I think pretty much all of us up here see FERC as a rubber stamping agency, not looking into the risks. Both on this situation where, it's outrageous that they've approved clearing trees, including, these folks' literal business that they're not going to have anymore without having the permit approved in New York State, which, if the permit gets disapproved and there's no pipeline, they just cleared all this land, and what's going to happen to those folks in Pennsylvania. So that, along with the fact that when we saw with the Algonquin incremental markets pipeline, they're building a pipeline 150 feet from next to critical electrical infrastructure that powers the nuclear power plant. That if that has a problem is going to potentially impact 20 million people. If that's not reckless, I don't know what reckless is. So yes, we are very much opposed to FERC, and we will be starting a very public campaign against them.
If the family could come forward to the microphone, I think you said you lost 90% of the trees.
We tap several areas of woods on our property. The only sugar bush is what we call it. The only area that we own where we can tap trees is that particular property, and 90% of the trees are being cleared right now. And anything that Constitution misses, the NED is proposed to clear in a couple of years.
So what does that do for your business, for your livelihood?
We've been expanding this business steadily for 7 years. It's North Hartford maple. We're just beginning to be able to produce commercially in a viable way to sustain ourselves. It's something I was hoping to make into a future livelihood. And if I wanted to do so now, I would have to purchase land somewhere with maple trees that someone will be willing to sell, and then pray that no one puts a pipeline through it in the future. Megan Holleran. Holleran.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, and we'll be awaiting the rejection of the permit, and hopefully won't be back here again. Thank you.